They buried a girl by the Salt River on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday her sister was smiling again. I want you to sit with that a second because I did, and it near about broke me. Not a sad smile. Not the brittle kind that folks wear over a wound so nobody pokes at it. A real one. The kind that reaches the eyes and stays there, easy as sunlight on water, like the world had handed her good news that morning instead of the worst news a person can get. Everybody in that camp, and half the white folks at my ranch too, decided the same thing about that smile. They decided Dossie had cracked. That grief had reached into her and turned something loose, the way a hard freeze splits a water barrel from the inside so it looks whole till the first thaw pours it out on the ground. They were kind about it, mostly. Kindness and pity look real similar from a distance. But I'd sold cattle for 22 years, and if there is one thing a man learns leaning on a corral fence, watching other men lie about the age of a horse, it's the difference between a person who's fooling themselves and a person who knows something you don't. Dossie knew something. I didn't understand it that first week. I filed it away, the way I file everything, in a cattle ledger I've got no business writing feelings in. But I couldn't stop coming back to it. A whole camp morning. A whole territory sure of the story. One girl, smiling, setting 2 bowls at the fire every single night for a sister the rest of the world had already put in the ground. Everyone believed she was dead. Except the twin who never stopped smiling. And God help me, before that winter was out, I'd be the man who found out which of them was right. The rain had been coming down for 3 days when they pulled her out. I remember that first, before I remember anything else, because rain in that country was a stranger you didn't trust. 9 months out of the year the Salt River was a suggestion, a wide gravel scar with a thread of brown water down the middle you could step across without wetting your boot heels. Then a monsoon would stack up black over the Sierra Ancha and dump a summer's worth of water in an afternoon, and that dry scar would fill up shoulder to shoulder and take everything it could reach. Fence posts. Cattle. A careless man. The land out there gave you 100 dry days to forget it could kill you, and then reminded you all at once. I was on the north bank with my hand to Maz, trying to save 4 cows that had drifted into the low bottoms before the water came up, and I was cursing them and the rain and my own fool self for owning cattle in a place God clearly hadn't finished making, when Tamaz went still in his saddle and said, "Señor, look." Downriver, maybe 200 yards, a knot of Apache men and women stood at the water's edge. There were maybe 15 of them, and they weren't moving like people who'd come to fish or water horses. They were bent, reaching. 2 of the men were waist-deep in that killing current with a rope, and I understood before I understood, the way your body knows a thing a second ahead of your head, somebody's in the water. I'd like to tell you I spurred right down there. I didn't. I sat my horse in the rain a full 3 seconds thinking about the 4,000 ways that could go wrong for a white rancher, and then I felt ashamed of the 3 seconds and went anyway. By the time we got there, they had her out. She was on the mud on her back, and she was young, 16, 17, hard to say through the wet, and she was the stillest thing I ever saw. There's a stillness to sleep and a stillness to death, and they are not the same stillness. And you know at the instant you see the second one, even if you've spent your whole life pretending you never will. Her lips had gone the color of ash. There was river silt in the corners of her eyes. An old woman knelt over her, pressing on her chest, not with the flat, frantic pounding I'd have expected, but with a terrible, patient rhythm, like she was trying to teach the girl's heart a song it had forgotten. And the girl's chest rose only when the old woman pushed it and fell only when she stopped. Nobody was screaming. That's the thing I've never gotten past. In my experience, white folks scream at death, they fight it loud, they wail, they call on God by name. These people were nearly silent. Just the rain and the river and the old woman's counting under her breath, and somewhere behind me a young man saying one word over and over so quiet I almost missed it, a name I didn't know yet. Kaya. They worked on her a long time. Longer than sense. The rain thinned to a drizzle and then quit, and the clouds pulled back off the mountains, and still the old woman pressed and counted. And I stood there in my dripping slicker feeling like the most useless object God ever set on two legs, holding my hat because it seemed like a thing you did. And then a woman came running down the bank. I'd learned later she'd been up at the camp, hadn't known, someone had gone to fetch her. She came off the slope at a dead sprint, black hair streaming, and she was so much the mirror of the girl on the ground that for one dizzy second I thought the river had made two of her. Same face, same build, same particular way of moving, quick and light, like the earth was a thing you touched rather than stood on. Twins, I'd never seen it drawn so exact. She dropped to her knees in the mud on the far side of her sister, and she took the girl's face in both her hands, and I braced for the wail. Waited for it. It's coming, I thought. This is the one who breaks. She looked at her sister's ashen face for a long moment. And then she smiled. I want to be careful here because I've told this part wrong before, told it like she'd already gone mad in that instant, and that's not true and it does her a disservice. She didn't smile like someone refusing the truth. She smiled like a woman greeting a sister across a crowded market, relieved almost. She said something to the still girl in Apache, low and warm, 3 or 4 words, the way you tease someone who'd done something clumsy. Look at the mess you've made. Something like that. And she brushed the silt from her sister's eyes with her thumb, so gentle, and she kept smiling. And the old woman looked up at her, and something moved across that old face that I couldn't read at all. They carried Kaya up to the camp. I didn't follow. Wasn't my place, and I had 4 cows and a spooked horse and a hand who kept crossing himself. And by the time I got them all up out of the bottoms, it was dark and the fires were lit up on the mesa, and I could hear, faint across the wet air, the sound of them beginning to mourn. So she had died after all. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself that the whole ride home, and I told my ledger the same thing when I finally got the lamp lit and sat down to write the day's tally out of pure force of habit. 4 head recovered. 1 yearling lost in bottoms. Rain 3 days. And then underneath in smaller writing, because I've never once managed to keep my own rules, Apache girl drowned, Salt R twin smiled. Don't understand it. That last line sat on the page and looked back up at me, and I turned the lamp down and went to bed, and did not sleep worth a damn. My name is Silas Wren, and I ran cattle in the Tonto Basin for the better part of 2 decades, and I'll tell you what kind of man I was so you can weigh what I say against it. I was a fair man, I think, but not a soft one. I paid my hands square and fed them good, and I did not cheat. But I also did not go looking for other people's troubles, because I'd had a wagon load of my own. I lost a wife to fever in '71 and a son to nothing at all. He just went east one spring and stopped writing, which is its own kind of dying, the slow kind that doesn't give you a grave to visit. After that, I got a reputation as a man who kept to himself, and I earned it. I found it easier to understand a cow than a person. A cow at least tells you the truth about what it wants. I kept the ledger because my wife had taught me to, back when we thought we'd build something, and after she was gone I couldn't stop, and after a while I started writing more than cattle in it. Weather, debts owed and owing. Now and again a thought I couldn't say out loud to any living soul. My hand Tamaz used to joke I loved that book more than the herd, and he wasn't altogether wrong. A man needs one place to put the things he can't carry. I tell you this so you understand that I was not, by nature, the sort of man who inserts himself into an Apache family's grief. I had every reason to leave it be. The basin in those years was not a peaceful place between the white ranchers and the Apache who'd been pushed and prodded onto ground that got smaller every year. The government felt like redrawing a line. There was blood on both sides of that ledger, and no honest man could pretend otherwise. My ranch sat at an uneasy edge of it, and my policy, my whole survival, really was to trade fair, cause no offense, and mind my own damned business. So it should tell you something that I couldn't leave this one alone. I went back 4 days later. Told myself it was to return a coil of rope one of the men had left snagged on my fence during the rescue, which was true, and which was also the thinnest excuse a grown man ever rode 10 miles on. The camp was a scatter of wickiups and a few canvas tents up on the flat above the river, and I'd traded there before venison for coffee, hides for salt, so I wasn't a wholly strange face. An older man named Say, who spoke more English than he ever let on, met me at the edge of it. He took the rope. He looked at me a while with those flat, unhurried eyes that Apache men had that made a white man feel like he was the one being read. "You were on the bank," he said. "I was. You didn't come down fast." There it was, nothing gets past those people. "No," I said, "I didn't. I'm not proud of it." Something eased in his face, just barely. I think if I'd made an excuse he'd have written me off entirely. But I'd handed him the true ugly thing, and that bought me something. I meant to leave then. I'd returned the rope, I'd taken my scolding, Honor was satisfied. But over his shoulder, at a low fire maybe 30 feet off, I saw her. Dossie, the living twin. She was crouched by the coals with a stick, turning something, and there were 2 bowls set out on a flat stone beside her. 2. And she was talking. Not to anyone I could see, the space across the fire from her was empty, but talking easy and steady the way you talk to someone stirring a pot beside you, pausing now and then like she was being answered. And she was smiling. 4 days after they'd wailed all night on that mesa. 4 days after I'd heard the morning carry across the water. She sat there smiling into an empty place at her own fire, and I felt the hair go up on my arms. Say saw where I was looking, his jaw tightened. "She grieves," he said, "in her own way. But he said it the way you say a thing you've decided to believe because the alternative is worse. I'd said things in that exact tone over my son. I knew the sound of it from the inside. Is she?" I stopped. There's no polite way to ask a man if a girl has lost her mind. "Her sister and her were never apart," Say said. "Not one day from the womb. When one was sick, the other felt it. When one dreamed, the other woke." He was quiet a moment. "She says Kaya is not dead. She says she would feel it. She would feel he moved his hand, searching, the string cut. And she feels no cut. So she waits." I looked at the 2 bowls, at the girl smiling at nothing. "But you buried her," I said, careful. "We buried her," Say agreed. And there was a whole world of grief packed down flat under those 3 words, and a whole world of doubt under it. And I understood that this old man had stood at a grave and put his own certainty in the ground beside the girl, and now had to live every day beside a sister who would not agree to let her stay there. I didn't have any business with any of it. I said my goodbyes and rode home and wrote in my ledger, "Twin still smiles. Sets 2 bowls. Old man half believes her and hates himself for it. So do I, maybe." Here's the thing I didn't tell them. Here's the thing I didn't tell anybody for the longest time, because it made no sense, and because saying it out loud would have made me part of something I wasn't ready to be part of. 2 weeks before the drowning, before the rain, before the rope, before any of it, I'd found a girl half dead in the desert on the far side of the Mazatzals. 30, 40 miles from the Salt River. Different watershed entirely, over a mountain range, a place no drowned girl could ever have washed to. She'd been Apache, or looked it. She'd been staggering along a dry wash at dusk when I came on her hauling a lame heifer home, and she'd gone down in a heap when she saw me, either from fear or from being 3 days past the end of her strength. Sunstruck, dehydrated, her feet cut to ribbons like she'd walked a long, long way over bad ground. She had a bad wound, half-healed and gone angry, along her ribs, the kind a man gives another man or a woman with a blade. I'd done what any half-decent person would, got water into her a swallow at a time, made a camp, wrapped the ribs as best I knew. She wouldn't speak, either couldn't or wouldn't, I couldn't tell which, and her eyes when she looked at me had a scoured, hunted emptiness that made me think of soldiers I'd known who'd come back from the war wrong. In the morning she was gone. Slipped off before dawn, took the canteen and a strip of dried beef, and left me a small stone set square in the middle of my saddle blanket, which I later understood was a kind of thank you and a kind of goodbye both. I'd written it in the ledger found Apache girl, near dead Mazatzel wash, gone by morning, bad knife wound ribs, and forgotten it more or less. Girls slipped off the reservation. Bad things happened out there that a rancher never got the whole of. It was a mystery with a sad shape and no answer, and I'd folded it away with all the others. It didn't connect. Why would it? A drowned girl in the Salt River had nothing to do with a knife-cut girl on the wrong side of a mountain range 2 weeks earlier. Two different tragedies in a country that grew tragedy like it grew mesquite. I want to be honest that for a long time I did not put them together, because I want to be honest that I nearly missed the whole thing out of plain lack of imagination. It was Dossie's smile that made me go back and read my own ledger. Winter came on. The cattle business ground down to its cold, mean off-season chores, and I had time to sit by my own fire and turn things over, which is a dangerous thing for a man like me to have. I went to the camp twice more that fall, always with an excuse, always thinner than the last. Coffee to trade. A horse I claimed I might sell. Tsay saw through everyone and let me come anyway, and I think it was because I was the only person in that country who looked at Dossie and didn't look away. Because that's what everyone did. Her own people had started to, not out of cruelty, out of the ache of it. It hurt them to see her sitting there smiling with her 2 bowls, so they let their eyes slide off her, the way you don't stare at a man who's lost an arm. And in doing that they'd made her into a ghost in her own camp, present and unseen, and I think some part of her felt it, because when I came, big clumsy white rancher with no gift for people, and actually looked at her, and sat down across those 2 bowls like the empty seat was worth anything, something in her opened toward me like a door. She spoke a fair bit of English, more than Say actually. Kaya had been the one who wanted to learn it, she told me, wanted to talk to the traders herself and not get cheated, and where Kaya went Dossie went, so Dossie learned it too, second-hand, sideways. She is the brave one, Dossie told me, one cold blue evening stirring the coals, present tense. She always used the present tense and it got so I hardly noticed anymore, so I found myself using it back. I am the one who follows. She goes first into the water, into the argument, into the trader's tent. I stay back. I watch. I smile. She smiled then to show me, and it was such a good and easy smile that I understood at last why it unsettled people so, because it did not match the story everyone had agreed to tell. Dossie, I said, careful, so careful. They told me you and your sister feel each other, that you'd know. I would know. And you feel? I feel her. She said it plain as reporting the weather. She is far, she is tired. Something is wrong, very wrong. She is afraid in a way I have never felt from her, not once in our whole lives, and it frightens me more than anything, this fear of hers I cannot reach. The smile flickered, the first crack I'd seen in it, and then steadied, deliberate, the way you'd steady a candle with your hand. But she is not gone. There is no cut string. I would feel the string cut, Silas. I felt our mother's cut. I felt our brother's cut. I know what it is. This is not that. But they pulled her out of the river, I said, gentle as I could make it. You saw her. I saw her. She was. I saw a girl, Dossie said. Everything in me went still. I saw a girl the river killed, she said, looking into the fire and not at me. A girl our size, a girl our age. Her face was under the silt and the water had done its work on her, and everyone looked and saw Kaya because everyone had heard Kaya went down at the crossing that morning, so they saw what they came to see. She turned and looked at me then, dead level. And there was nothing mad in her eyes at all, nothing loose or broken, just a terrible steady grief held in a terrible steady grip. I looked at that girl's hands, she said. Kaya broke her smallest finger when we were 9, falling from the cottonwood. It set crooked. Every day of our lives I have seen that crooked finger. The girl from the river had 2 straight hands. The fire popped. Somewhere a dog barked and went quiet. You didn't tell them, I said. I told Say. And he had already carried her up the bank, calling her Kaya. The whole camp had already begun to mourn Kaya, to take it back. She shook her head slowly. You do not know what it is, Silas, to tell a grieving people that they must stop grieving because the body is a stranger. They cannot hold two things. They needed to bury someone. There was a girl to bury, some poor daughter of somebody, drowned alone with no one to weep for her. And so we buried her and we called her by my sister's name, and everyone was allowed to close the door. Everyone but me. I sat there a long while. The cold came up through the ground into my legs and I didn't move. So you smile, I finally said, because you know she's alive. I smile, Dossie said, because if I stop, if I let them see me grieve, then it becomes true. Then Kaya is the girl in that grave and I am the mad sister who could not accept it. My smile is the last place my sister is still alive. It is the only thing I have that says she is out there and I have not given up. And she looked at me, this girl who the whole territory had decided was broken, and she said, "It is not madness to refuse to bury someone who is not dead. It only looks like madness to people who have already picked up the shovel." I have thought about that sentence every day of my life since. I didn't sleep that night either. I lay in my cold house, and I thought about a crooked finger, and I thought about two straight hands, and I thought about a girl I'd found half dead in a dry wash on the wrong side of a mountain with a knife wound in her ribs, 2 weeks before a stranger drowned wearing another girl's name. And around 3 in the morning, in that flat gray hour when a man's defenses are all down, and the truth can get at him, I got up and lit the lamp and opened the ledger and read my own 2 entries, weeks apart, that I had never once thought to read together. Found Apache girl near dead Mazetzel wash, gone by morning, bad knife wound ribs. Apache girl drowned, Salt R twin smiled, don't understand it. I sat there with the two of them open in front of me and my hands shook, and I'll tell you honest I was afraid, because I understood I was standing at the edge of something, and once I stepped off it, I would not be the man who kept to himself anymore. The girl in the wash had cut feet like she'd walked 40 miles over bad ground, away from something, wounded, terrified with that scoured, hunted look. Alone, weeks before her sister felt a fear she'd never felt in all their lives together. Kaya was the brave one. Kaya went first, into the water, into the argument, into the trader's tent. Kaya wanted to learn English to deal with the white men herself. What if Kaya had gone first into something that fall, alone, the way she always did? What if she'd gone somewhere or seen something or crossed someone, and gotten a blade in her ribs for it, and run over the whole Mazetzel range on cut feet with the wound going bad, running toward home the only way a wounded thing runs, straight and desperate and half out of her mind? What if I had knelt over Kaya herself in that wash, put water in her mouth a swallow at a time, and never known her name? And what if, while she was still out there, hurt, hunted, 40 miles from home and unable to make it the rest of the way, some other poor drowned girl had come up out of the Salt River, and a whole grieving people had looked at her ruined face and agreed, out of love and out of exhaustion, and out of the plain human need to have some place to put their pain, that the story was over. I did not know. I want to be clear that I did not know that night. It might have been coincidence. The country was full of wounded girls and drowned girls and mysteries with no bottom. But Dossie had never stopped smiling, and I was starting to understand that her smile was not a broken thing at all. It was the only unbroken thing left. I picked up my pencil. My hand was steadier now, and under those 2 entries I wrote a third, and it was the most frightened and the most alive I'd felt since before my son went east and stopped writing. The girl in the wash was Kaya. I think I held her sister's living heart in my 2 hands and gave it water and let it walk away into the dark. God forgive me. I'm going to find her. Then I put on my coat, though it was still hours till dawn, and I went out to look at my maps of the country west of the Mazetzels, where a wounded girl on cut feet might have crawled to ground and be waiting, afraid, in a way her sister could feel 40 miles off, for someone to come. Anyone. I meant it to be me. I did not find her for 11 weeks. I want to say that plain and up front, because I've heard how these stories get told around a fire. Man has a revelation at 3 in the morning, saddles up, rides 2 days, and there's the girl. Life doesn't move like a story. Life makes you earn it, and mostly it makes you earn it and then hands you nothing anyway. And the 11 weeks I spent looking were the longest of my life, and there were whole stretches of them where I was certain I was a fool chasing a dead girl over cold country on the strength of one crooked finger and one sister's smile. Winter dug in hard that year. The high passes closed. I couldn't get a man to come with me. Tamaz flatly refused, told me to my face I'd gone as soft in the head as the Apache twin, and I couldn't rightly argue the point. So I went alone on my off days, 3 days here, 4 days there, working a grid across the broken country west of the Mazatzals the way I'd work a pasture looking for strays. Methodical. Stubborn. It was the only virtue I had, and I spent all of it. I told myself I was being systematic. The truth is I had almost nothing to go on. A wounded girl walks in the direction her pain points her, and pain doesn't read a map. I found sign twice that first month that turned out to be nothing, an old sheepherder's camp. A Yavapai family moving between winter grounds who looked at me like I was exactly the kind of trouble their whole lives had taught them a lone, armed white man usually was. I gave them coffee and asked in my clumsy signs and worse words about a hurt Apache girl. They gave me nothing. I don't blame them. I'd have given me nothing too. I kept the ledger through all of it. It was the only thing that kept me honest, kept me from making the country tell me what I wanted to hear. Week 3. Nothing. Snow in the high draws. Am I mad? Dee still smiles. Went by camp, sat with her, said I'm looking. She took my hand. Didn't say a word, just held it. That was the thing that kept me going, if I'm honest, more than the crooked finger or the map. Every time I passed near the camp I'd stop, and I'd sit at that fire across from those 2 bowls, and I'd tell Dossie where I'd been and what I hadn't found, and she never once wavered. She never asked, "Are you sure?" She never said, "Maybe you're wrong." She just listened and nodded, and kept that fire going and kept setting that second bowl, and her faith was so total that it became a kind of debt I owed. I could not go back and tell that girl I'd quit. I'd have rather died out there in a snow draw. I very nearly did twice. Here is the closest I can come to explaining why a solitary man, who'd spent 20 years learning to want nothing, threw all of it away, over 2 Apache girls he had no claim to. I had let a boy go east once, and never gone after him. I told myself all the reasonable things. He was grown. He'd made his choice. A man doesn't chase a son who's decided to stop writing. It's undignified, it's futile, you can't force a person to be found. All of that was true, and all of it was a coward's arithmetic, and I had lived with the answer it gave me for years, lived with it the way you live with a stone in your boot you've decided is easier to endure than to stop and shake out. Kaya wasn't my daughter. Dossie wasn't my kin. But somewhere in those 11 weeks it stopped mattering whose blood it was. I'd been given, late and undeserved, a second chance to be the kind of man who goes after the one who's out there in the dark. And I understood with a clarity that frightened me that if I let this girl stay lost when I might have found her, I would be finishing the job I'd started on my own soul the day I let my son disappear. I wasn't only looking for Kaya. I don't think a man is ever only doing the thing he's doing. I found her in the 11th week. And I found her by accident, the way you find everything that matters. There was a Mexican settlement down in a canyon near the border of the old Spanish land grants, a place called Agua Fria that wasn't on my maps and wasn't on anyone's, a scatter of adobe and goats and a little church with a bell somebody'd hauled up from Sonora 50 years before. I'd gone down there half frozen and out of grub, meaning only to buy beans and a night out of the wind. I was not looking. I'd stopped, in that particular hour, actively believing I would never find her. I decided that very afternoon up on the rim that this was the last swing, that I'd go home and tell Dossie the truth and let the 2 of us grieve together like sane people. And I'd felt something die in me when I decided it, quiet and final, the same thing that had died the day my son's letter stopped. And then the old woman who sold me the beans, making conversation, mentioned La Muta, the mute one, the Apache girl the shepherds had found in the fall, more dead than alive, a knife wound gone bad in her side, who'd been living in the back room of the church ever since because she wouldn't speak and had nowhere to go, and the priest was too soft-hearted to send her off. I set the beans down on her counter, very carefully, so my hands wouldn't shake. "How is her hand?" I said. My voice came out strange. The old woman looked at me. "The girl, her hands, is there the little finger?" I couldn't remember the Spanish, and I held up my own smallest finger and bent it crooked, and the old woman's face changed, and she crossed herself and said she, la mano, and made the same crooked shape back at me. And I had to put both my hands flat on that counter and hold on to it because the room had gone sideways. They took me to the church. I remember the walk across the little plaza took about 100 years. I remember the bell rope hanging still in the cold. I remember the priest, a small tired man with kind, exhausted eyes, meeting me at the door and understanding from my face before I said anything that I had come for her, and being afraid. I saw it, afraid I was the danger she'd run from, the one who'd put the knife in her. Because why else would a white man come 40 miles in winter asking after a girl nobody knew? "I'm not the one who hurt her," I said. "I'm looking for her because her sister never stopped believing she was alive. Her sister is at a fire 2 mountains north of here with 2 bowls set out. She's been setting the second bowl every night for 3 months. Please." The priest looked at me a long moment. Then he stood aside. She was in the back room, in a shaft of cold light from a high window, sitting on a cot with a blanket around her shoulders, and she was so thin and so still and so hollowed out that for one gutting second I thought I'd come all this way to a dead girl after all. Her hair had been chopped short, sickness or grief, I never learned which. There was a long scar down her side where the wound had finally closed. She was a ruin of the quick, bright thing I imagined she'd been, but she was breathing. And when she turned her face to the door and saw me, she went rigid with fear, and her 2 hands came up. And I saw it, I saw the crooked littlest finger on the left one, set wrong at 9 years old, falling from a cottonwood. And I went down on my knees on that stone floor because my legs would not hold me. "Kaya," I said. She hadn't spoken in 3 months, they told me. Not one word in any language to anyone. She looked at me, this stranger, this white man on his knees weeping in the doorway of her hiding place, and something moved behind her eyes, some terrible dawning, because I had said her name, and no one in Agua Fria knew her name. She had never given it. And if a stranger knew her name, then the world she'd fled from had reached her after all, or... "Your sister sent me," I said. "Dasi, she never buried you. She wouldn't. She's been waiting. She said you were alive, she said she'd feel it if the string was cut, and everyone thought she'd lost her mind, everyone, the whole territory, but she was right, girl. She was right about you the whole time." And Kaya opened her mouth, and out of 3 months of silence came one word, cracked and broken, and hardly a sound at all. The first word she'd said since the knife and the river and the long walk over the cold mountains. "Dasi." Just her sister's name, that was all. But she said it, and then she was reaching for me. This girl who a moment before had been braced to run, reaching across the room with both her ruined hands. And I crossed that floor on my knees, and I held her while she shook. And I have held a wife dying of fever, and I have held the last letter my son ever sent me. And I am telling you, I never held anything in my life the way I held that girl, both of us strangers. Both of us weeping in a cold church at the bottom of a canyon that wasn't on any map. I never did find out the whole of what happened to her. I've made my peace with not knowing. Some story of men and a raid and a wrong she'd walked into first the way she always went first, and a blade, and a run for home that fell 40 miles short. She told the priest fragments over the following days, and he told me some, and the rest she carried into her silence, and I let her. It wasn't mine to dig up. I'd come to bring her home, not to open her. We couldn't travel for 2 more weeks. She wasn't strong enough. I sent word north with a Yavapai trader I trusted, 3 words, all I dared put in another man's mouth. She is alive. I don't know if it reached the camp before we did. I like to think it didn't. I like to think Dossie got to be right in person. The ride back took 6 days at the pace Kaya could manage. She rode in front of me on my horse for most of it, wrapped in every blanket I owned, and she didn't speak much. But somewhere on the 3rd day, coming up out of a frozen valley with the whole white shoulder of the Mazatzals ahead of us, she said, without turning around, in careful sideways English learned second-hand from a sister. She set 2 bowls. Every night, I said. I saw it myself. Drove me half mad, tell you the truth. Everybody thought. I know what everybody thought. A long quiet, the horse's breath smoking in the cold. I felt her, Kaya said. In the church, in the dark, when I could not even feel myself, when I did not want to be alive anymore, there was a small light always that I could not put out no matter how bad it got. Warm, stubborn. She was quiet again. That was her. She would not let go of her end of the string, so I could not quite let go of mine. She turned her head then, just enough that I could see the edge of her face, and she was, God help me, she was smiling. The exact same smile, the one that had unsettled a whole territory, and now I understood it right down to the root, because it wasn't madness and it never had been. It was 2 people refusing, across 40 miles and a mountain range and the grave itself, to agree to let each other go. We came up on the camp at dusk on the 6th day. I have gone back and forth for years on whether to try and describe what happened when those 2 saw each other, and I've decided I won't, not really, because there are things a ledger can't hold, and that was one of them, and I'd only cheapen it. I'll tell you this much, and then I'll leave it be. Dossie was at her fire. 2 bowls set out, same as always in the last light. She heard the horse and she looked up, annoyed, almost, at being interrupted, the look of a woman whose smile had cost her the right to be looked at like a person, and then she saw who was on the horse in front of me. And she didn't run to her. That's the part I wasn't ready for. She stopped. She went absolutely still, the way you go still when a thing you have wanted so long and so hard is suddenly right in front of you, and you're afraid it's a trick of the failing light, afraid to move in case moving breaks it. She stood there by her 2 bowls with her hands at her sides and her whole face open and shaking, and Kaya slid down off my horse on her ruined legs and started across that camp toward her sister. And the whole camp was going still now, one person after another turning, the morning songs they'd sung 3 months ago dying in their throats. And Dossie finally moved, finally broke, and the sound that came out of her was not a word and not a wail. It was every day of that smile giving way at once. 3 months of certainty and loneliness, and being the only person in the world who believed, all of it, coming up out of her in one sound as the 2 of them went down together in the dust between the wickiups, and the whole camp came apart around them, and old Say, who had carried a stranger up a riverbank calling her by the wrong name, who had put his own certainty in a grave, and hated himself for the one certainty he couldn't kill in his niece. Old Say stood at the edge of it with his hand over his mouth and wept like a child. I stayed on my horse at the edge of the firelight. It wasn't my moment. I'd known it wouldn't be, the whole ride home, and I'd made my peace with that too. Some things you carry a long way just to set them down and step back. I want to tell you it was a clean ending. It mostly wasn't, and I'd be lying to make it so, and I've spent this whole account trying not to lie to you. There was a grave 2 mountains north with a stranger in it who'd been mourned under Kaya's name, and now that Kaya was home, that poor drowned girl was nobody again, unmourned and unnamed, and that sat hard on the whole camp, and it sat hardest on Kaya herself, who understood she'd been given back a life at the cost of another girl losing even her borrowed grief. She insisted they go and sit with that grave, insisted it be tended. She held my place, Kaya said. Someone should weep for her that isn't only weeping for me. So they did. They kept that stranger's grave from then on, and never learned her name, and wept for her as the one who came in Kaya's place, which is not nothing, which may in the end be more than the girl would have gotten anywhere else. It's a hard mercy, but the country only made the hard kind. And Kaya was not the same girl who'd gone into the mountains and never would be. She'd left something out there in the cold that didn't come back with her. Some nights she didn't sleep. Some days the silence took her again for hours. Dossie would sit with her through those, not talking, just holding her end of the string, and slowly, over that winter and the spring after, Kaya came back to herself. Not all the way, but enough. Enough to laugh once in my hearing at something her sister said. Enough to go first again, someday, into the water or the argument or the trader's tent, because that was who she was and the river hadn't drowned it. I went home to my ranch and my cattle and my ledger. Things went back, more or less, to what they'd been. Tamaz never fully forgave himself for the soft-in-the-head remark and made it up to me in 100 small ways he'd have died before nomming. I was a solitary man again mostly, by nature and by long habit. But I wasn't the same either. You don't cross a country in winter to unlose someone and come back the man you were. I'd learned a thing about the kind of man who goes after the one who's out there in the dark, and I couldn't unlearn it. That spring, without telling anyone, without any good reason a sensible person would accept, I wrote a letter. I'd not written one in years and my hand was clumsy at it. I addressed it east, to the last town I'd ever had word of my son in, care of a boarding house that was likely long torn down, with no real hope it would find him and no idea what I'd even say if it did. I wrote it anyway. I walked it to the trading post, and I sent it off into the same cold, uncertain country that had swallowed Kaya. And I understood as I let it go that this was the whole reason, maybe, that the two Apache girls hadn't only taught me their thing, they'd made me finally able to do my own. I don't know if it reached him. It's been 3 years and no answer, and most mornings I've made my peace with that. But every night, out of a habit I picked up in a canyon that isn't on any map, I set 2 cups of coffee by my fire instead of 1. And I don't drink the second, and I don't put it away. Because I learned the difference, from a girl the whole world called mad, between grieving someone and refusing to bury someone who might still be out there. And I learned that the second one only looks like madness to the people who have already picked up the shovel. So I keep the second cup. And I keep